The fastest way to expose the weakness of an empire is to make it laugh at the wrong person. The wedding was broadcast to more than 4,000 inhabited worlds. Every major network carried the ceremony. Every noble house watched. Every senator, governor, admiral, and royal observer tuned in to witness what many were already calling the greatest insult in imperial history. Princess Seraphine Vera stood beneath a dome of living crystal at the center of the imperial citadel. Silver light poured through the transparent structure high above. Thousands of floating lanterns drifted through the air like miniature stars. The setting was magnificent. The mood was not. The guests were smiling, but not out of happiness. They were smiling because they thought the entire event was a joke. At the far end of the ceremonial platform stood Nathan Hale, a human, a white-skinned man from a young species that most of the Empire barely acknowledged. He wore a simple, formal uniform tailored specifically for the occasion. No jewels, no royal insignias, no signs of status. Compared to the nobles surrounding him, he looked almost ordinary. That was precisely why everyone was staring. The imperial choir performed ancient songs while diplomats whispered behind elegant masks. Some did not bother whispering. A human, one noble muttered. She could have chosen anyone. That is the point, another replied. She wants the council embarrassed. Laughter followed. Nathan heard every word. He simply stood quietly with his hands folded behind his back. His expression never changed. Above the ceremony platform floated massive projection screens transmitting the event across the galaxy. Millions expected outrage from the human. Embarrassment. Anger. Something. Instead, they found calm. That confused people more than if he had protested. Princess Seraphine approached the center of the platform. Her royal blue skin shimmered beneath the crystal light. Long silver-white hair flowed across the shoulders of her ceremonial attire. Violet eyes surveyed the audience without warmth. The Imperial Council sat directly behind the throne dais. Many members looked offended simply by being present. Good, Seraphine thought. That had been the entire reason for the marriage. For decades, the Council had controlled nearly every important decision within the Empire. They manipulated succession, controlled trade routes, crushed reforms before they could begin. The princess had spent years fighting them. Today she had chosen a different weapon. Humiliation. If the council believed humans were insignificant, then she would marry one in front of the entire galaxy. The symbolism alone would ignite outrage among the old noble families. The ceremony proceeded. Ancient vows echoed through the crystal hall. Witnesses recorded every second. Reporters analyzed every expression. Yet Nathan remained strangely relaxed. When the officiator finally asked whether he accepted the union, his answer was simple. I do. No hesitation. No nervousness. No resentment. Just quiet certainty. Something about that answer made Seraphine glance at him. For the first time that day, she noticed something unexpected. He was not intimidated. Not by the nobles. Not by the cameras. Not by the throne. The realization lingered with her long after the ceremony ended. Hours later, as dignitaries attended extravagant celebrations throughout the palace, Nathan stood alone on a balcony overlooking the capital city. Towers of silver glass stretched for miles beneath the evening sky. Thousands of ships moved between illuminated spires. Behind him, the Empire celebrated what it believed was a political stunt. Ahead of him, countless lights covered the horizon. Nathan studied them quietly. Then his eyes settled on a distant transit network glowing above the city. Something about it seemed wrong. Very wrong. While the entire Empire laughed at the wedding, the human was already looking at a problem nobody else had noticed. The celebration lasted long after midnight. Music drifted through the crystal corridors of the Imperial Citadel. Noble families gathered inside private chambers to exchange rumors and complaints. News networks across thousands of worlds continued replaying the wedding ceremony. Every discussion reached the same conclusion. Princess Seraphine Vera had embarrassed the Empire exactly as intended. Yet while politicians argued and commentators speculated, the newly married human remained focused on something entirely different. Nathan Hale stood before a transparent display wall inside a quiet observation chamber overlooking the capital. Below him stretched the largest city in known space. Millions of transport vessels crossed illuminated pathways between towers that reached nearly half a mile into the sky. Streams of light flowed endlessly across the horizon. To most observers, the network looked flawless. To Nathan it looked unstable. He enlarged one section of the transit grid, then another, then another. Patterns began emerging. Small inefficiencies, minor routing delays, tiny resource imbalances. Individually, they appeared harmless. Together, they formed something far more concerning. The door behind him opened. Nathan did not turn around. "You followed me." Princess Seraphine stepped into the chamber. "You noticed." The room became colder. The princess almost smiled. Most people would have said they heard the door. Nathan finally looked up. That too. For several seconds, neither spoke. The city glowed beneath them like a sea of stars. Seraphine studied the human carefully. Earlier, she had expected frustration, perhaps resentment. Instead, she found curiosity. "You are not angry," she said. Nathan returned his attention to the display. "Should I be? The entire empire laughed at you today." "The entire empire laughs at many things. You were one of them." Nathan shrugged lightly. "People are allowed to laugh." The answer caught her off guard. Most nobles would have spent hours defending their pride. The human appeared completely uninterested in doing so. Seraphine walked closer to the display wall. "Then what are you doing?" Nathan activated another layer of data. Thousands of transportation routes appeared across the city. Looking at a problem. The princess glanced at the projection. "The transit network?" "Yes. It is considered one of the greatest engineering achievements in the empire." Nathan nodded. "That is why it worries me." Seraphine folded her arms. "Explain." The human pointed towards several intersections highlighted in amber light. "The system works beautifully right now." Another section illuminated. "But population growth is accelerating." Another cluster appeared. "Resource distribution is becoming uneven." More routes shifted colors. "Within 12 years, the network will begin creating delays." The princess frowned. 12 years. Approximately. Nobody has mentioned this. Nathan smiled faintly. Nobody is looking far enough ahead. Silence settled between them. The city continued shining beyond the glass. Seraphine examined the projections again. The calculations appeared surprisingly detailed. "How long have you been studying this?" "Since the wedding ceremony." "A few hours?" "Enough time." The princess stared at him. "You found a flaw in the Empire's most advanced transit system during your own wedding." Nathan considered that statement. "When you say it like that, it sounds strange." For the first time that evening, Seraphine laughed quietly. A genuine laugh. Not the political smiles she wore around nobles. Not the calculated expressions used during negotiations. A real one. The sound surprised both of them. Nathan looked toward her. The princess quickly regained her composure. "You are different from what I expected." "That seems to happen often." Outside, thousands of ships continued moving through the night sky. Inside the observation chamber, neither of them realized that the conversation they had just shared would become the first small step toward changing an entire galaxy. The next morning, the Imperial Council convened inside the Hall of Governance. The chamber itself was designed to inspire obedience. Hundreds of floating banners drifted beneath a ceiling nearly 300 feet high. Representatives from thousands of worlds occupied elevated platforms arranged in perfect circles around the central floor. Every decision that shaped the empire eventually passed through this room. Every major conflict, trade agreement, expansion project, and succession dispute began here. Princess Seraphine Vera entered through the eastern corridor. Conversation immediately softened. Not because of respect, because everyone wanted to see whether the rumors were true. Behind her walked Nathan Hale. The human wore the same simple formal uniform. No royal decorations. No ceremonial armor. No attempt to imitate the nobility surrounding him. Several counselors exchanged amused looks. Others barely hid their irritation. One elderly governor shook his head openly. The princess continues her performance. Quiet laughter followed. Nathan heard it. As usual, he ignored it. The session began. Reports filled the chamber for nearly 2 hours. Economic forecasts, infrastructure updates, population projections, resource management reviews. Most representatives paid little attention. Many conversations occurred privately through communication implants. Nathan listened, watched, studied. The empire was enormous. Yet the problems repeated themselves with surprising consistency. Delays, waste, bureaucracy. Layers of administration built on top of older layers until entire systems struggled beneath their own complexity. Then a transportation minister activated a presentation. A familiar network appeared above the chamber. The capital transit system. Nathan immediately sat forward. The minister sounded proud. Current efficiency remains at 98.4%. Forecast models indicate continued stability for the foreseeable future. Several counselors applauded politely. Nathan frowned. Seraphine noticed. What is it? She asked quietly. The human stared at the projection. Their model is incomplete. Before the princess could respond, the minister continued. No major restructuring will be necessary for at least 50 years. Nathan blinked. 50. Seraphine glanced toward him. You disagree. Very much. The princess hesitated for only a moment. Then she stood. The entire chamber immediately turned toward her. My husband wishes to ask a question. Silence followed. Some representatives looked annoyed. Others looked entertained. The transportation minister smiled politely. Of course. Nathan slowly stood. Hundreds of eyes focused on him. The human seemed completely unconcerned. Your forecast assumes population growth remains concentrated in the core sectors. The minister nodded. Correct. Nathan pointed toward the projection. But migration patterns changed 3 years ago. The minister frowned. Only slightly. Not slightly. Nathan activated a public display terminal. Data streams appeared above the chamber. Routes shifted. Demographics reorganized. Resource corridors illuminated. The room grew quieter with each passing second. The migration change created a secondary growth cluster here. Another section lit up. And another here. More data appeared. Within 12 years, these intersections will exceed operational thresholds. The transportation minister stared at the projection. That is impossible. Nathan calmly expanded the model. New calculations filled the air. The silence deepened. Several analysts began checking the numbers independently. One after another, their expressions changed. Finally, a senior economic advisor slowly stood. The calculations are accurate. The chamber erupted into confused discussion. Representatives spoke over one another. Advisors reviewed data. Counselors demanded explanations. Through it all, Nathan simply sat back down. Seraphine looked at him in disbelief. You solved that overnight. Nathan shrugged. The problem was already there. Then why did nobody see it? The human watched the chamber descend into chaos. Because they were looking at today. His gaze shifted toward the projection still hanging above the room. Tomorrow is usually where the real problems hide. For the first time since the wedding, nobody in the chamber was laughing at the human. The story spread across the empire before the council session had even ended. By sunset, every major information network carried the same headline. Human identifies 12-year infrastructure failure in less than 1 day. Analysts debated the implications. Economists reviewed the calculations. Transportation authorities quietly began implementing recommendations that had not officially been approved yet. Nobody wanted to admit it, but everyone understood the truth. The human had been right. Again, Nathan Hale, however, seemed completely uninterested in the attention. 2 days later, he sat alone inside a quiet archive chamber reviewing public infrastructure records while sunlight filtered through towering crystal windows. The room contained centuries of administrative data. Most visitors found the archives painfully boring. Nathan appeared perfectly comfortable. Rows of projections floated around him. Population statistics, agricultural outputs, resource distribution maps, trade networks. Thousands of pages of information moved silently through the air. He studied them with patient concentration. The door opened. Princess Seraphine Vera entered carrying a small data tablet. I had a feeling I would find you here. Nathan glanced up. The archives are peaceful. Most people avoid them. That is why they are peaceful. The princess shook her head with amusement. She had begun noticing a pattern. Whenever political disputes erupted throughout the palace, Nathan disappeared into rooms filled with information. While others chased influence, he chased understanding. Seraphine approached one of the floating displays. What are you studying now? Nathan enlarged a map showing dozens of outer colony worlds. Food distribution. The princess blinked. Food distribution? Yes. Why? Nathan pointed toward a cluster of agricultural systems near the edge of imperial territory. Because this makes no sense. Seraphine examined the map. Nothing immediately appeared unusual. Explain. Nathan highlighted several trade routes. These colonies produce more food than they consume. Additional routes illuminated. Meanwhile, these worlds import food despite possessing suitable farmland. More data appeared. The Empire spends billions moving resources unnecessarily. The princess stared at the projection. How long has this been happening? Nathan checked another report. Approximately 130 years. Silence followed. 130 years. According to the records. Seraphine folded her arms. That cannot be right. Nathan smiled slightly. I thought the same thing. Together they reviewed the data. The deeper they looked, the stranger the situation became. Layers of outdated regulations had accumulated across generations. New policies were built on top of old ones. Temporary solutions became permanent systems. Eventually, nobody questioned the process because nobody remembered why it existed. Nathan finally leaned back in his chair. There, he activated a revised model. Trade routes reorganized instantly. Supply chains shortened. Transportation costs dropped dramatically. The entire network became simpler, cleaner, more efficient. Seraphine stared at the results. How many worlds would benefit from this? Roughly 270 million people. The princess looked at him carefully. You solved that in an afternoon. Nathan shrugged. The information was already here. Then why did nobody fix it? The human glanced around the endless archive. Because nobody was looking. Later that week, the revised distribution model was quietly tested in several sectors. The results exceeded every expectation. Transportation costs fell. Delivery times improved. Resource waste decreased. Colonial governors praised the changes publicly. For the second time, something unexpected happened. Citizens across distant worlds began asking the same question. Who is Nathan Hale? The question spread faster than official statements. Faster than political commentary. Faster than rumors. Ordinary people did not care about royal scandals or noble pride. They cared that their lives had suddenly become easier. And for the first time in imperial history, millions of citizens were thanking a human they had never met. Far above the city lights, the stars shone across the night sky. Inside the palace, Nathan returned to the archives searching for the next problem. He still believed he was making small improvements. The rest of the galaxy had already begun noticing something much larger. Within 3 months, the effects could be measured across hundreds of star systems. Shipping delays decreased. Agricultural shortages became rare. Trade efficiency reached levels not seen in generations. Citizens noticed. Governors noticed. Corporate alliances noticed. Most importantly, worlds located far from the imperial core noticed. For decades, many frontier planets had felt ignored by the central government. Decisions made inside the shining towers of the capital often arrived years too late. Problems remained unresolved because nobody important considered them urgent. Then something unusual happened. Responses started arriving faster. Resources appeared where they were needed. Obvious inefficiencies disappeared. People wanted to know why. The answer spread through communication networks from one system to another. Nathan Hale, the human, the princess's husband, the same individual many had laughed at during the wedding. Inside the imperial palace, however, not everyone appreciated the growing attention. General assemblies became increasingly tense. Several noble houses openly criticized the recent reforms. Publicly, they argued about procedure. Privately, they worried about influence. Influence was the true currency of power. And somehow a human with no title beyond marriage was accumulating it faster than many ancient dynasties. Princess Seraphine Vera sat through another exhausting council session, listening to complaints disguised as political concerns. One counselor rose dramatically from his seat. The Empire cannot continue implementing recommendations from someone with no governing authority. Murmurs of agreement followed. Another representative stood. Traditions exist for a reason. A third added, policy should be shaped by qualified leadership. Throughout the discussion, Nathan remained completely silent. He sat beside the princess reviewing a report. The counselors became increasingly frustrated. They wanted a confrontation, an argument, a mistake. The human refused to provide one. Eventually, Seraphine leaned closer. You could defend yourself. Nathan glanced up from the report. Why? They are attacking your work. Not really. Then what are they doing? Nathan looked around the chamber. Several counselors immediately looked away when their eyes met his. They are protecting their position. The princess studied him for a moment. That does not bother you, should it? Once again, the answer left her without a response. Later that evening, a delegation from 3 outer colony systems arrived unexpectedly at the palace. They requested a formal audience. The council assumed they wanted to meet the princess. Instead, they asked for Nathan. The request created visible confusion. The delegation entered a reception chamber overlooking the city skyline. Their leader was an elderly governor from a remote agricultural world. He carried no expensive decorations, no elaborate symbols of status, only a simple data tablet. When Nathan entered the room, the governor stood immediately. "Sir." Nathan looked surprised. "You do not need to stand." "Yes, I do." The governor handed him the tablet. "You helped save our colony." Nathan accepted it carefully. The display showed economic reports, population records, infrastructure statistics. The governor pointed toward a chart. "For 30 years we submitted requests for transportation reforms." His voice remained calm. Nobody listened. Another chart appeared. "Then your recommendations were implemented." The governor smiled. "Our exports doubled." Silence settled over the room. Nathan studied the numbers quietly. Around him, members of the delegation watched with genuine gratitude. Not political gratitude. Not ceremonial gratitude. Real gratitude. The kind that came from lives becoming better. For the first time, Seraphine saw something unexpected in Nathan's expression. Not pride. Not satisfaction. Responsibility. The human closed the tablet and returned it carefully. "I'm glad it helped." The governor nodded. "You changed more than a transportation network." Outside the palace windows, thousands of lights stretched across the horizon. Across those stars, millions of citizens were beginning to trust a human they had never met. And trust, Seraphine realized, was becoming far more powerful than any title the Empire could grant. 6 months after the wedding, the Empire faced a problem that no one could ignore. It began as a collection of minor reports arriving from distant sectors: supply shortages, communication delays, resource disputes between neighboring systems. Individually, none appeared alarming. Together, they formed a pattern. The pattern spread across hundreds of worlds, then thousands. Inside the Hall of Governance, emergency sessions became increasingly common. Representatives argued over causes. Economists blamed trade fluctuations. Governors blamed transportation authorities. Transportation authorities blamed regional administrations. Everyone had an explanation. Nobody had a solution. Princess Seraphine Vera sat through hours of debate beneath the towering ceiling of the council chamber. Frustration filled the room. Voices grew louder with each passing day. The Empire was not collapsing, not even close. Yet something was clearly wrong. Systems that should have functioned smoothly were becoming unpredictable. Small inefficiencies multiplied into larger problems. The complexity of governing thousands of worlds had finally begun overwhelming the structures built to manage them. Through all of it, Nathan Hale remained unusually quiet. That alone worried Seraphine. Normally, the human spent his time studying reports, asking questions, and proposing improvements. Recently, he had become more thoughtful, more focused. One evening, she found him inside the archives surrounded by projections stretching from floor to ceiling. Entire star sectors floated around him. Economic networks, population centers, resource corridors, trade routes. The scale was staggering. "You have been here all day," she said. Nathan glanced up. "Most of yesterday, too." "That is not encouraging." The human smiled faintly. "No, it is not." Seraphine walked toward the nearest projection. Thousands of glowing connections linked worlds across the Empire. The image resembled a living organism more than a government. "What are you seeing?" she asked. Nathan stared at the network. The Empire was designed for a smaller galaxy. Silence followed. The princess frowned. "Explain." Nathan enlarged several regions. Every generation added new systems. More layers appeared. New laws. Another layer. New agencies. Another. New regulations. The projection became increasingly complicated. Nobody removed anything. Seraphine watched the network transform into a tangled web of overlapping structures. Suddenly, the problem became obvious. It is too complicated. Exactly. Nathan activated another display. This one looked dramatically different. Cleaner. Simpler. Elegant. "What is that? A replacement?" The princess stared. "You redesigned the administrative structure of the Empire?" Nathan nodded. Mostly. Mostly. There are still a few sections I am reviewing." Seraphine laughed in disbelief. The human had just described reorganizing the largest government in known space, as though he were adjusting furniture in a room. The following week, a classified review committee examined Nathan's proposal. Economists studied it. Logistical experts studied it. Artificial intelligence systems studied it. Every evaluation produced the same conclusion. The design worked. Better than anyone expected. Much better. One analyst summarized the results in a single sentence. This should not be possible. News of the review spread despite security restrictions. Soon governors began requesting access. Corporate alliances submitted inquiries. Frontier systems openly demanded implementation. The momentum grew faster than anyone anticipated. For the first time, worlds were not waiting for the Imperial Council to lead. They were asking for Nathan directly. One evening, Seraphine stood beside a palace window overlooking the city. Thousands of lights stretched beyond the horizon. Nathan stood nearby reviewing another report. "Do you realize what is happening?" she asked quietly. The human looked up. "Probably not." The princess smiled. "People are starting to trust you more than institutions that have existed for centuries." Nathan looked back toward the stars beyond the glass. His expression became thoughtful. "That sounds dangerous." Seraphine followed his gaze toward the night sky. Across thousands of worlds, a simple idea was spreading. Not loyalty to a throne. Not loyalty to a government. Loyalty to a person who solved problems nobody else could solve. And that idea was becoming more powerful every day. The crisis arrived quietly. That was what made it dangerous. There were no explosions. No invading fleets. No dramatic warnings visible across the stars. Instead, one communication relay failed. Then another. Then 5 more. At first, technicians treated the outages as routine maintenance issues. Communication networks occasionally experienced disruptions. The empire was vast. Minor failures happened every day. But within 48 hours, reports began arriving from every major sector. Entire regions were losing synchronization. Navigation updates arrived late. Resource allocations became inconsistent. Trade schedules drifted out of alignment. The systems responsible for connecting thousands of worlds were beginning to fall apart. Inside the Hall of Governance, emergency alerts illuminated every display. Representatives filled the chamber. Voices overlapped. Advisors rushed between stations carrying reports. For the first time in years, genuine concern replaced political performance. Princess Seraphine Vera stood beside the central projection, studying a rapidly deteriorating network map. Red warning indicators spread across the empire like cracks forming inside glass. "How bad is it?" she asked. The chief systems director swallowed. "Worse than expected." New failures appeared on the display. Entire sectors blinked amber. If synchronization collapses completely, transportation systems will begin operating from conflicting datasets. Silence followed. Everyone understood the implications. The empire depended on information. Every shipment, every communication, every navigation corridor. Everything relied on coordinated systems sharing accurate data. Without that coordination, confusion would spread rapidly across thousands of worlds. Council members immediately began arguing. Some demanded emergency restrictions. Others proposed shutting down regional networks entirely. Several governors blamed one another. Hours passed. Nothing improved. Then a quiet voice interrupted the chamber. "Everyone is treating the symptom." The room fell silent. Nathan Hale stood near the edge of the projection. He had spent the entire meeting listening, watching, studying. The chief systems director looked exhausted. "Then what is the cause?" Nathan approached the display. His fingers moved across the interface. Layers of information expanded. Communication routes, administrative structures, resource networks, population flows. Thousands of variables appeared simultaneously. Several analysts looked overwhelmed within seconds. Nathan continued examining the data. Then he stopped. There, one small section illuminated. The highlighted region contained no major capital, no important military facility, no famous trade hub. It was an administrative routing cluster located nearly 600 light-years from the Imperial core. Several counselors frowned. That cannot be the source. Nathan enlarged the display. More information appeared. The room became quiet again. Every major network eventually passes through this coordination layer. Additional pathways illuminated. The system was expanded repeatedly over centuries. Another layer appeared. Nobody noticed the architecture became dependent on a single processing structure. The chief systems director stared at the display. His expression changed instantly. By the stars. Nathan nodded. Exactly. Suddenly, everyone understood. The Empire did not have thousands of independent systems. It had accidentally built one enormous system resting upon a hidden foundation nobody remembered existed. And that foundation was failing. Seraphine watched as realization spread through the chamber. Can it be repaired? Nathan remained silent for several seconds. Then he activated another projection. A completely different network structure appeared above the room. Cleaner, stronger, decentralized, elegant. The design resembled the administrative model he had proposed months earlier. It can do more than survive, he said quietly. It can become better. Silence filled the hall of governance. No arguments followed. No objections. For the first time, nobody questioned the human. Across the Empire, billions waited for answers. Inside the chamber, every eye remained fixed on Nathan Hale. The man once invited into the palace as a political insult was now the only person who seemed capable of guiding an entire civilization through its greatest challenge. And for the first time, even the most powerful leaders in the Empire had stopped asking whether they should listen to him. The only question remaining was how quickly they could. Implementation began immediately. For the first time in generations, the Imperial Council approved a proposal without months of debate. There was no time left for politics. Communication networks continued deteriorating. Administrative systems struggled under increasing pressure. Every hour mattered. Across thousands of worlds, engineers, analysts, governors, and logistics teams received the same instruction. Transition to the Hale framework. The name appeared unofficially at first. Then it appeared everywhere. Nathan disliked it immediately. Unfortunately, nobody asked his opinion. The new architecture spread through the Empire faster than any reform in recorded history. Communication nodes were reorganized. Resource networks were decentralized. Administrative bottlenecks disappeared. Systems that once depended upon distant authorities gained the ability to adapt independently. The changes were not dramatic to ordinary citizens. That was precisely why they worked. Life became easier, faster, more reliable. Most people never noticed how close the Empire had come to a systemic breakdown. They only noticed that problems were disappearing. Weeks passed, then months. The crisis that once threatened the stability of thousands of worlds gradually faded. Trade routes stabilized. Communication delays vanished. Economic growth accelerated. Entire sectors reported record efficiency levels. The Empire was not merely recovering. It was evolving. Inside the Imperial Palace, Princess Seraphine Vera watched the transformation unfold through endless reports arriving from every corner of known space. One evening, she stood beside a panoramic observation window overlooking the capital. The city below glowed brighter than she had ever seen it. Millions of lights stretched across the horizon. Countless vessels crossed the sky in organized streams. Behind her, Nathan sat quietly reviewing a report. As usual, "You realize what is happening, do not you?" she asked. The human looked up. "Something good, hopefully." Seraphine laughed softly. "That may be the greatest understatement in Imperial history." She activated a projection. Messages appeared from hundreds of worlds. Governors expressing gratitude. Scientists requesting consultations. Community leaders sharing stories. Agricultural colonies. Trade hubs. Research stations. Frontier settlements. Every message carried a similar theme. "Thank you." Nathan stared at the display for several moments. "That seems excessive." "It is not." Seraphine studied him carefully. "You saved the Empire." The human shook his head. Thousands of people implemented the solution because they trusted the person who proposed it. Silence followed. Nathan returned his attention to the projection. Hundreds of faces appeared. Different species, different cultures, different worlds. Yet all of them shared the same expression. Hope. Weeks later, a remarkable phenomenon began spreading through the communication networks. Independent systems outside Imperial territory voluntarily adopted the Hale framework. Neighboring alliances requested access. Neutral civilizations translated the architecture into their own languages. Even rival governments quietly incorporated elements of the design. Nobody ordered them to do so. Nobody forced compliance. They simply recognized that it worked. For perhaps the first time in galactic history, A single idea connected civilizations that had never trusted one another. The news media struggled to describe what was happening. Political analysts called it a reform movement. Economists called it a structural revolution. Historians called it unprecedented. Ordinary citizens used a much simpler phrase. They called it Nathan's network. One night, Seraphine discovered the term appearing across public forums. She showed it to Nathan. The human immediately looked uncomfortable. That sounds ridiculous. You are becoming a symbol. I would prefer not to. The princess smiled knowingly. That decision may no longer belong to you. Beyond the palace walls, stars filled the darkness. Across those stars, billions of people had begun embracing a common vision for the future. Not because an emperor demanded it. Not because an army enforced it. Because they believed in the human who helped them solve problems nobody else could solve. And somewhere among those countless worlds, people had already begun using a title that neither Nathan nor Seraphine had heard yet. A title that would eventually spread across the entire galaxy. The Builder of Tomorrow. Years later, historians would struggle to identify the exact moment everything changed. Some pointed to the wedding. Others pointed to the transportation reforms. Many believed the communication crisis marked the turning point. They were all wrong. The real change happened quietly, the way most important things do. It happened when billions of people across thousands of worlds decided that trust mattered more than power. The imperial capital had never seen a gathering like it. Delegations arrived from every corner of known space. Representatives from allied civilizations, neutral coalitions, independent systems, frontier settlements, trade federations, scientific alliances. For the first time in history, groups that rarely occupied the same room voluntarily traveled across the galaxy for a single event. The Hall of Unity had been constructed specifically for the occasion. Its transparent ceiling revealed a sky filled with stars. Thousands of lights reflected across polished crystal floors. Princess Seraphine Vera stood near the central platform watching the arrivals. Years earlier, she had married a human to embarrass an empire. Looking around the enormous chamber, she almost laughed at the memory. The irony had become impossible to ignore. Nathan Hale entered moments later carrying a simple data tablet. No ceremonial robes. No elaborate symbols. No attempt to appear important. Despite everything that had happened, he looked exactly like the same man who had stood calmly through a wedding while an empire laughed at him. The difference was everyone else. As Nathan crossed the hall, leaders rose from their seats. Not because protocol demanded it, because respect did. The room fell silent. Representatives from thousands of worlds watched him approach the platform. Nathan looked uncomfortable immediately. Seraphine noticed and smiled. Some things never changed. The ceremony itself was simple. No crowns. No declarations of conquest. No claims of superiority. Instead, a coalition charter appeared above the assembly. A framework connecting civilizations through shared knowledge, cooperation, and decentralized governance. The structure was based upon the principles Nathan had spent years developing. Systems that empowered people instead of institutions alone. Networks designed to adapt instead of control. A future built through participation rather than obedience. One by one, representatives added their approval. Then another. Then hundreds more. The display expanded until thousands of worlds glowed across the projection. A living constellation stretched above the hall. Seraphine looked toward Nathan. "Do you understand what this means?" she asked quietly. The humans studied the stars of light hovering above them. "It means people work together." The princess shook her head softly. "It means they followed your example." Nathan never answered. Perhaps because he still did not see himself the way others did. Outside the capital, celebrations spread across countless worlds. Not in honor of an emperor. Not in honor of a throne. In honor of an idea. The idea that one person could improve the future simply by caring enough to solve problems others ignored. Long after the ceremony ended, Nathan and Seraphine stood together beneath the night sky overlooking the city. Millions of lights stretched toward the horizon. Above them, stars filled the darkness. Somewhere among those stars, citizens had already begun calling Nathan a god. Not a god of power. Not a god of war. A god of possibility. Nathan never accepted the title. He never wanted it. But titles belong to the people who give them, not the people who receive them. The stars reflected in the palace glass as silence settled between them. Empires had ruled through authority. Dynasties had ruled through inheritance. Legends had ruled through fear. Yet the human who changed the galaxy ruled through none of those things. He simply helped people build a better tomorrow. And in the end, that proved stronger than any throne.